What's up, gamers? Welcome to episode 41 of the Business Casual Gamers podcast. As always, we're the show focused on gamers with jobs, families, and who have things to do in real life. I'm Aaron Connick, alongside my co-host Chris Smoke. Chris, how are we doing this week?
Doing very well.
Outstanding. So this episode, we will be talking about our BCG Discussion Topic of the week, which is going to be collecting rare video game items. We're also, at the end of the show, we're going to go through our game assignment, where this week Chris has assigned me Gravity Rush that we'll be talking about. So looking forward to covering that. So before we get into the show topic this week, let's go through how do you find us on the interwebs. So the easiest way is to look for us on our website, businesscasualgamers.com. You can always follow and connect with us on Twitter at BISCasualGamers. Also, look for us on YouTube. We got a lot of fun content posted there. Just search for Business Casual Gamers. And if you like what you hear, either on this episode or any others, if you've listened to us for any length of time, we'd really appreciate if you would rate us on iTunes. Always the best way to help keep the show growing and expanding to a new audience. So, Chris, with that, we're going to get into our BCG discussion topic of the week about the thrill of the chase, the collection of the rare video games. So Chris, we've all had that one item where we maybe we read an online article or we see a YouTube video of a collection. We say, man, I really want to own that.
Yep.
It's the unicorn item. But then how do you take the step from dreaming about owning that item to actually finding it in some cases and then going through the negotiation process and actually taking the step to buy it and own it? So on today's episode, what we really want to get into is some of our own experiences, some actually very recent, going through and buying these, and then a word of wisdom or two on what's our process? How do we go about this so that people who are maybe new to that element of the hobby can find some hacks, some tricks to make their lives easier? So Chris, talk me through. Give me an example of a time where you've maybe had to chase after that unicorn game item.
Just one?
Just one. Whatever comes to mind. It's like a word association.
I'll give you one that happened and one that is still ongoing, actually. And I'll start with the ongoing one because it is a little interesting. I've always wanted, when I was growing up in the 90s, I always wanted a Turbo Duo.
Okay.
And they call them slightly different things in the U.S. Turbo Express was obviously or not Turbo Express, but PC Engine was the TurboGrafx 16, from Japan over here in the U.S. And one of the things that I really wanted was that Turbo Duo. I could never find one. And even back in the 90s, I was calling as a kid. I was getting my mom to call for me, everywhere trying to find these stupid things. So this is something that I still, to this day, am still looking for a PC Engine, a Turbo Duo R, a Japanese version, and they're a little bit too expensive for me, I think. But this is some of the things that we have to talk about, right? It's how rare these things are. It's how old they are now, for one thing. It's also how expensive they are and how you are willing to accept during that negotiation process, as you mentioned, how you buy one. Now, the one example that I will tell you, it's a positive story. Is I've always wanted. We talked a little while ago about the Famicom disk system, and in fact, I think episode 2, we actually did a little bit of an expose on my Famicom disk system that I have. It's a Sharp Twin Famicom, which is actually the cartridge-based Famicom with the NES or the Famicom disk system all in one. And for those of you who are unaware of it, it's really interesting because it's a system that only came out in Japan. The disk system was never released in the U.S., and it was an interesting way to actually go through, kind of test a new way of getting to the marketplace and changing games for Nintendo back in the early 90s. And, long story short, it actually was done away with largely because of piracy and other kinds of concerns. But for me, that was always really interesting because many folks don't know that the first Metroid, the first Zelda, Super Mario Brothers 2, for example, all these games, the Lost Levels version, I should say, a lot of these games were initially released on the disk system.
Little known fact, absolutely.
Right, little known fact, and only later down the road, after the disk system started to kind of die and the writing was on the wall, and some of the silicon and the prices for these chips got a little bit better, did they actually start putting like Legend of Zelda, for example, on a cartridge? And of course, when it came over to the US, it was already there. So I wanted to own a number of those. And for example, I have a sealed, unopened Metroid 1 FDS disc that I found on eBay for, $20 or something like that a long time ago. And I wanted to be able to, not to play that one, of course, but I wanted to be able to have, that kind of a set of these really nice core FDS games that were, represent the very first of some amazing series for me in the Nintendo era. And also I want to be able to, to experience a little bit more of a cool way to get at these FDS discs. We looked at it a little bit in the past, but the FDS itself, the original one for Nintendo, is pretty darn ugly. So it's not something that I was interested in.
Yeah, and I think you touched on, we touched on it in a past episode where we talked about kind of how do we view collecting. But I think that speaks to really the chase items that we're after, things that have that emotional connection for us. And so for me, I know I mentioned it on our last episode where I've been looking for some rare special editions of Beatmania 2DX copies. And it's been something that you're looking for not just the game, because the games are pretty easy to find. If you're willing to pay the money, because they were all imports, if you're willing to pay the money, you'll find the game in kind of whatever condition you want, frankly. But the hard part is that to get the games in the conditions and with the packaging that I want, you had to not only order the game, which was a limited, very limited print run itself, but you had to go to the Konami website and pay up to get the extra swag edition. And only so many people, let's be honest, most people just want to play the game, and they want to play it as cheaply as possible, and they're not willing to pay up another $100 to just get more stuff. That's the one I want, and you're trusting or you're looking for people who have preserved it years after it was released in some kind of complete condition. So that's where it gets difficult. The other thing that I've been looking at recently that I pulled the trigger on it back when they were released, but I'm looking at some additional additions to the collection, I guess you could say, is some of the Mad Catz fighting sticks. Okay. So I bought back in the day, one of the rewards I bought for myself when I got promoted was actually the Street Fighter 4, the Tournament Edition stick. I think it was like a $130 stick back in the day. And they released some different editions. So I'm a big fan of BlazBlue. They released a similar one with BlazBlue art on it. There have been subsequent ones for PS4. So I'm trying to see what's been released to really catalog that. And I'm looking at some different options around that, or whether I'd build a custom one or something like that. So these are all things where there's a lot of steps to go through to figure out, okay, well, I've identified something that I think I want. How do we go through the process? So, Chris, you touched on a couple things, and I want maybe you to elaborate as you were going through your console decisions, because you mentioned some condition parts I want to come back to. How rare is the item really? And what kind of condition or completeness is good enough for you? So, Chris, when you were kind of sizing up that purchase and saying, I know this is an older item, but there's lots of different conditions that something could be in. How did you kind of frame that decision in your mind of what am I willing to chase after and pay up for, frankly?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a really hard question for me because I tend to take care of my things. So you look at, we talked about manuals for Super Nintendo and Nintendo games. I have stacks and stacks of manuals. Unfortunately, not the boxes, but manuals for all the games I had when I was young, and they are all in perfect condition. I never used them. And so it's partially kind of how we go through like comic collecting and other kinds of collecting. I always wanted to make sure that when I bought something, I kept it. It's what I had. I didn't have a lot necessarily, and I want to make sure I could keep track of it. So because a lot of my collection is very nice, I wanted to have very nice things. Yeah. I might have referenced in the past that I have 5 or 6 Zelda 1s, the gold cart for the NES. I wanted a boxed complete version of that with a perfect actual cart. I wanted the map. I wanted the instruction manual. I wanted the box. I wanted the little foam insert and all those kinds of things. And slowly I've gotten that over time. And so one of the things that I started initially was, and this is the hard part, is this game and these games mean so much to me, Zelda in particular, or the FDS in this case, getting that, building that collection meant so much to me that I wanted something that I could look at and think, this was cared for by its previous owners, how I want to care for it here. And we have, if you're watching the video on YouTube, you see I have a lot of these consoles behind us. I want to display them. I want them to look nice. I don't want scratches. I don't want breaks unless I have to. And so I kind of decide that on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, I want an 8 or higher across the board.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I will tell you, when I was looking at the Beatmania 2 DX items, there were a couple things I had to contend with, and this is maybe a kind of a pro tip. I was looking for special edition items that had multiple components. So to give an example, most of the special editions had a bonus DVD that had the songs being played with some visualization background or a live concert of the songs being played. In some cases, they had a soundtrack that was packed in. And then usually you would have, depending on the release, you would have special edition, an outer sleeve or an outer box that would actually hold all the DVD discs and all the containers. Or one of the ones I actually posted on our Twitter to try and have the plea for help to find them, had a box that basically kind of like a tin that opened up. One of them had T-shirt, had pins, had stickers. And so then, right, you're talking about like items that are frequently going to be unpacked. People are going to look at them. They might take the stickers off. So you're not only saying, okay, maybe I can get the tin because the tin's the cool thing, but what kind of condition am I willing to deal with on the other items? Something else that I actually did on one of the games that I bought, and this is a strategy that you may want to consider. So in Chris's case, he said, all right, what are the components of a complete Zelda game? I need a really high quality condition case or a box. I need a manual. I need a game. I need a map. Do I have to buy it all at once, or could I piece these items together individually? Yes. And that's something that I will tell you as I became new to kind of not the hobby, but collecting rarer things or older things that had multiple pieces to it. That was something that I had to start to discover. So in one of the Beatmania DX purchases, when I bought Distorted, person was selling the tin and all of the contents that were literally as good as if the factory would have sent me the game, it would have been not as good as this. It was that quality. But you could tell the guy wanted to keep the game. So what I said, well, I'm never going to get like this condition of the packaging. I'm never going to get again. I can get the game easily. Get the game for slightly above original retail value. And so what I did is I bundled, I paid a separate price on the packaging, and then I just bought the game separately, and suddenly I have a complete version. Whereas in your case, to your point, maybe somebody's listing the map, and the other parts are easy to get, maybe, and then I just pay a little bit extra on the map, or maybe I can get it as a discount because that person doesn't realize that the map is the hardest thing to find.
That's actually, that's probably the number one most critical point, I think, when you're trying to collect these kinds of more rare items. Unless you are, kind of if you are gung-ho and you want to get sealed games, then, you're going to pay out the nose. But that's exactly what I did for Zelda 2. That's the reason I have, people ask me why I have 5 Zeldas. Well, because I find a decent one for $15 or whatever, I buy it. And then I find a better one, and I buy it. And I find a better one, and I buy it. I keep upgrading it. And the goal, of course, is to get rid of some of those other games in the past. And so for me, I'll give you another example. I for whatever reason, I really like Super Mario 3. It was a great game. And one of the things that's I'm not usually a label variant kind of person, but if anyone, it's really interesting to look at the history of how the printing of Super Mario 3 went. In early versions and early runs in the US for the Nintendo, the Bros part of Super Mario Bros was actually offset a little bit. It kind of clipped over a Mario just a little bit. And so they produced boxes and games with that Bro moved in a little bit clipping. They quickly figured this out and realized it wasn't aesthetically pleasing, and so they moved the Bros off to the left to get it out of the way, and they reprinted everything. And so I wanted to have, it turns out that I had bought way back when, my first copy of Super Mario 3 was the original, Bros clipping version, but I didn't have the box. I really wanted to have a boxed version of SMB3, and so I actually have, I pieced it all together. I found a box first that someone was selling, a boxed version of Super Mario Bros. 3 with the game that was cheap. And the funny part was, here's what's funny. Anecdotally, it was interesting to me because it was an updated version of the game, but a but an old version, first run of the box. So I knew that person had kind of mixed and matched as well before they were selling it, because it wasn't the boxes. I think my understanding was they were all printed either one way or the other. So it's funny to see that. So I bought that, and I ended up, long story short, I had to find a manual to go with it as well that had the same misprint as well. And so those kinds of things. The cool part about that is, and the interesting part about it is, some people, you go on eBay or Craigslist or wherever you might go to find these things, and you look at them, and they'll want to sell you an NES manual for $20, and that's just ridiculous.
Sure.
But many times you'll find just that one person, like maybe it's a grandmother whose nephew or niece was at her house for a number of years and left the manual, made its way into a box. They're cleaning out their attic or whatever it might be. You'll find that pristine, manual for $2 because they're like, it's a piece of paper.
They don't know what it's worth.
And so you piece all that stuff together, and I can say that happened to me, where you get a complete in box Super Mario Brothers. It's not a lot. Maybe it's $30, $40. But I probably paid $15 for it altogether.
Right.
And I got my little label variant thing to satisfy my sick
That's exactly
needs.
right. But one of the things that I want to definitely drive home for our listeners is the more information you go into these searches with, of knowing the details, how many of those were produced, at what point did they switch production over. It's one thing to see how many copies of Super Mario Brothers 3 were produced, but to know, okay, here's about how many, what percentage of that may be exactly what I'm looking for. Same with another very popular collectible game, Panzer Dragoon Saga. That's another that's it's kind of like cult classic among collectors. People know how many copies were made. Same with, frankly, Beatmania 2 DX. One of the things I had to look at was how many copies of this do I think exist? Because you do. When you're really sizing it up and saying, okay, half of these are probably not for sale because unless I'm willing to pay an outlandish price, there's probably going to be somebody who appreciates this as much as I am, and they just don't want to let it leave their collection. And then the rest of them, you're saying some percentage are going to get destroyed, or the condition's bad enough to where I won't want it anymore. It does help to arm yourself with as much information to say, am I looking for a needle in a haystack, or am I looking for something that's, it's not, everybody doesn't have it, but it's not something that is impossible if I'm willing to spend the time or to spend, which gets to our next step, which is how much money are you willing to spend? So Chris,
exactly.
We could probably make an entire episode out of this step, but one of the things that you always have to do once you figure out and you're crystal clear about what's the item, what's the condition, about how many are out there, let's say, then you have to say, well, what is a realistic price target that I am willing to go in on this item? So, Chris, when you kind of size this up, I mean, you clearly had some knowledge of what consoles or what the boxes for Super Mario Brothers 3. You had a range of what they were worth.
Right.
How did you go, deciding what am I willing to part with to get this particular item?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'm a little bit different from this perspective. I know some people go out and they collect for value, and they want to make sure they don't overpay. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Like, so for example, the Turbo Duo R I'm talking about, those are about $200, $250 if you get a good one. That's what they're worth, right? Based on rarity, based on all those kinds of things. It's what they're worth. Unfortunately, it's not what I'm willing to pay for in this particular case. And so that's one of the reasons I haven't bought one. And so for me, it is understanding the rarity, understanding the market value of it is good, because ideally you don't want to pay $200 for something that's worth $100 in a sense.
Sure.
But here's the thing: we're talking about nostalgia, and so for me, I look at this and I say, if I turn around and I look at my bookshelf and I see this Mario game here, complete in box, this Zelda complete in box, do I care that I paid $20 more for it than it's really worth? Well, honestly, if what I'm paying is it seems right to me, and I'm not going to look at that every day and think, oh my God, I just should not have spent that money. To me, it's fine. And so I've overspent on a number of things just because it was a 10 out of 10, it's perfect quality, or I like there's actually a couple of vendors on eBay they're one of the main things that they do is they import things from Japan, for example. So if you want to get a really high quality Super Famicom or whatever, you can get one, and you can get one from people who are in the U.S., so you can get it 2 or 3 day free shipping, You don't have to pay. You don't have to take the risk of getting it to and from Japan, which can really be a disaster.
Oh, sure.
And the other thing is, when you look at it, this particular seller will go through and will provide hundreds of pictures of every little thing on the console or on the game. They'll give you a no kidding estimation on its it'll give an A, B, C, D, whatever ranking. So if it's an A, it really is an A quality thing. Now what you notice though is you do pay a little bit more for that, and I honestly don't mind it because number one, this particular guy takes requests. So if I can say, hey, I want this kind of game, he'll tell me what it's going to cost to get it.
Sure.
And I've got like a couple of really rare, strange, off the wall Famicom games from him that are literally beautiful right out of the box from him. And so when I come to this thing, for me, it's just like any other collecting thing. I'm not buying this to sell it. I'm not valuing my collection. I'm not trying to do those kinds of things. I don't want to overpay necessarily, but for me, if I see a perfect example and I see something that's above market value and I'm okay paying it, I'll end up going for it.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. So, I look at it a couple different ways. So for items where, let's just say it may be rarer, but it's clearly not unique. Let's just say I go on eBay and I see a few different versions. You can tell quality differences fairly easily if the pictures are detailed enough. But let's just say it's a fairly like item where that you're not looking at the one that's going to come available every year or something like that. That is fairly easy to establish a target price. And at that point, if you want to pay for quality, to your point, in increments of whatever it costs to say, I'm going to go from a B to an A, and that's going to cost something. Those are things that I know I'm exactly like you, and I am willing to pay for the A if I've decided I want to have it in the collection. And so those are very easy to rationalize. And I just kind of say, okay, let me make sure that I'm not grossly overpaying if there's a better deal or if I see these listings kind of churning all the time. But for something, the Beatmania example for me has been a unique exercise. So let me give an example. All of these are import games, so you're mostly dealing with foreign sellers. I've actually been able to find about half of them from U.S. sellers. But there was one particular version where I saw one listing, only one picture, and it was, let's say, $85, okay?
Yeah.
So even though they can describe the quality, I can't see the pictures of the disc. I can only see the outer sleeve and that it's intact, but I can't really see the DVD cases. I don't know if they're stickers. I don't know the condition.
Yeah.
I had another seller that had all the outer sleeve, the case, the DVD, but they also had the poster. They had a couple other pack-in items that frankly weren't the most important thing, but they were listing it for $250. And granted, they had detailed pictures of absolutely everything. I mean, you knew exactly what you were getting. And this same seller had another game that I haven't seen anywhere else in particularly immaculate condition. And so I ultimately made the decision to say, I am willing to pay a little bit more for this one item to bundle it with the other item in hope it's that I would get them both and say, hey, I'm a serious seller. I appreciate the condition of both these items. Let's just let's negotiate a price on all of this together rather than saying, I could find this one piece elsewhere for a little bit cheaper. I just said, let's negotiate a package. And ultimately, I made them an offer, and I'll get into this in a second in terms of pricing tactics. I made them an offer and just said, all right, I think that's a bit high because, frankly, it's tough to establish value on that because no like item is out there like it. But I said, give me this. How about let's do this? And they turned it down. And I said, okay, I'm not going there. Serious buyer. Look, I'm not trying to lowball, but what if I did this? And I came up probably $80 to $100 in total to say, hey, I'm serious. I really want these together. I want to preserve them. And I came up, and it was still probably $100 off their original ask, but we made it happen. And I think part of that is appreciating the condition, knowing exactly what you're getting, but being willing to say at the end of the day, hey, if this is the right condition, I'm going to, what's $100? To search for it for another year, 2 years?
Yeah.
There's a certain point at which you just have to say, my time is worth something, and if this is what I want to a T, I'm going to reward this person and give them some cash.
Yeah, no, that said, one thing I will interject here, and it's a little bit off topic, but it's related. I think it's important for you as, as a collector, I'm speaking to the audience, and, Aaron and myself as well are included, to understand what it is in this process that really makes you happy. And I'll tell you this because this is something that I have found. And we talked about it. It's in the title, the thrill of the chase, right? Is this collecting, is it the chase or is it the end goal, right?
Yeah.
I love to tell you right here that that I like having all these games boxed for NES and all this kind of stuff. And I do like them, but I also haven't touched it in like 6 months.
Sure.
And I haven't played it in 6 months. And the more I look at it, the more I think it's really just the occupation of my mind. It's the fact that when I drive by a Goodwill, I'll stop in for 5 minutes, take a look. Or if I drive, past neighborhood and they have an estate sale or they have some other things, we'll talk about those kinds of places soon. But, it's the actual chase piece. And once you obtain the item you want, it looks great. You put it on your shelf or whatever. But you also feel a little bit empty because now you're not actively seeking that item. So
Sure.
Understand, in your own mind, whether you want the end state, whether you like the kind of thrill of the chase. And what I've found over time is there are some things like the Turbo Duo R is something I've been looking for 3 years. And I say that not because I haven't been pulling up eBay every day looking for it. Periodically, I'll just check it. And in some weird sense, I feel validated and I feel excited, but that today could be the day that I just plug in that thing and I see that perfect game system at the perfect price and I can just go and pick that thing up.
Yeah. And that's totally right. Now let's move on to kind of step 3. So we've established the quality, we've done some research, and we've established a general price target. I think at that point you need to really be clear and say, kind of like what Chris said, in terms of what's your values, what are you looking for, how much does this item mean to you, and are you willing to wait for price? Mm-hmm. And this is something that I think it really depends on the item for me. But I remember when I took a look, let's just say I had a game like the Fight Sticks as an example. There are several of them on the market in some cases. Condition matters, but it's not something that I'm honestly urgently collecting. I'm still kind of feeling the waters for what I want. And so I'm not as anxious about whether something disappears for a while or I have to wait for a listing. In those kind of cases, I'll tell you what I've done consistently, and it has worked on so many items that I just kind of do it as a matter of course now. Honestly, if it's something where you feel like the item is rare enough to where even though the seller is probably holding like the one version or they have the one eBay listing or whatever it is, a lot of times as a buyer, you feel like they have all the power and you feel like, oh, well, I can't let this go. It can't get away or somebody else is going to snatch it up. But the reality is when they have the rarer the item, the more limited the buyer pool is. So they may be holding something that is extremely rare, but it's also rare to get somebody who's willing to come and pay for a leisure item that much money that appreciates the quality. And so oftentimes what I will do in those cases is I will offer 20 to 25% less than list price or what I think it is kind of a fair price. And I will tell you that has been snapped up so many times to say, hey, serious buyer, cash money in your pocket now to let go of this and stop listing it and stop wondering if it's going to sell or to wonder about price. Just get it out of your life. I'll appreciate it. Take 20% off. So many times it's worked that, like I said, it has just become a reflex at this point. And if you are willing to wait and you are willing to have a little bit of patience and price shop and say, hey, there's going to be another one, I would say try it and you will be surprised. And some people will probably look at me and say 20%. I'm offering 80% off. Like I'm only going to pay 20% of the item. But figure out what your comfort level is and how long you're willing to wait. But don't think that list price is final price.
Well, you don't want to insult them in a sense either, right? So, I mean, it's like buying a house or a car. You don't 80% off, you're going to get the person mad at you more often than not. And one of the things that we'll talk about as we get further into this, or we can just dig into it now, I don't know, is, you're seeking, to your point, Aaron, we're buying collectible items and you are representing a collector as well. And what I mean by that is there's a personal connection there that you're going to make with this person. And I'll give you a personal example here. So I had a buddy of mine. So I make it pretty well known that I like video games, that I kind of collect them, or that I at least, if I buy something, like I got a Super Scope from a friend a while back. I may never use a Super Scope, but it's going to be taken care of, and it's going to be clean, and it'll be displayed in some case. The box is mine, whatever. And so I had some friends come to me and say, hey, I told them I was looking for boxed NESs, and I wanted Rob the Robot. And if you look, Rob is like $150 or something. It's insane to get Rob. And so one day my friend came to me and said, hey, I have this boxed NES with Rob the Robot, and it has, a handful of games just in a box. Like, just what do you think's a fair offer? And I told him, I was playing with him. I said, look, I'm not. I was kind of getting towards the point where I wasn't buying too many of these types of things anymore. And I said, I'll tell you, if you put this on eBay, it's worth like $300, $400, $500 with all the games you had with it. But I could do $200. And he was like, look, you know what? Like, I know that this stuff will go to a good home. I know you're a collector, and you're going to appreciate what you have here. So he took the $200, and it was, for me, I guess I probably bought $400 or $500 worth of stuff just for $200 from a friend. And I made clear, and granted it's a friend, but you can do this online as well. I made clear, I was honest with them, as in these cases during that negotiation process, what it could be worth. But like you said, Aaron, you don't know. They may need the money today.
Yeah.
They may just want it out of their house or whatever. There could be a million different reasons why their time is valuable, just like your time is valuable as well. And so, it doesn't hurt to offer competitive, I'd say, offers. 25% is usually always in the ballpark. 35, 40% gets a little bit more insulting, and 80% they'd probably just never return your calls.
I always
or
find 20% is typically about the sweet spot. But I do definitely agree with you. I mean, for the Beatmania purchases, I've paid less than list price. And again, list price is, here is what they are hoping to get for it. And maybe that's based on similar listings. Maybe it's just based on their best estimate of what it might be worth. But I will tell you, in each one of those cases, there's been a follow-through discussion to really thank them for preserving an item that if they didn't take care of it, I might not be able to own it. And for those, I am willing to pay for quality, and I am willing to say, you know what, I'm not going to haggle over it. If that's what it costs, then that's what it costs, and it'll go to a good home. So let's talk a little bit about how do we track down those hard-to-find items. So Chris, you touched on a couple things. So my primary method is eBay. I personally, I do not enjoy the physical hunt very much. I enjoy watching other people go through the physical hunt actually quite a bit, but I do not personally enjoy going to places, only because a lot of times I find I've had so many experiences where the quality I find is less than I would willing to be accepted. I've just never had that diamond in the rough moment personally, to where I've just said, I'll look at it online, I can verify condition in most cases well enough, and that's kind of where I'm going to do my damage.
I'll answer this two ways. Years ago, 5-10 years ago, Thrill of the Hunt was awesome because you could go into a random store or like I mentioned, stop at some random off-the-wall garage sale, and you could walk in, could find, whatever you want, like a Jaguar for $2, whatever it is. And, since eBay has gotten more popular, since people have, I think our generation has, it's funny, business casual gamers, right? We have grown older. We seek nostalgia with our childhood. We also happen to have a lot more, cash to spend on these kinds of things that aren't necessities, really. And so, collecting has become a big deal, and traditional game collecting, right? And so, that puts it in a bad position for me. eBay will always be more expensive. The people will always list things higher than you expect them to be. It's kind of like, if you ever tried to hire for a position, you say, I want 12 years experience, and you'd really accept 6 or 5, right? But you're going to put 12 on that sheet. And that, the thing is, a lot of people with 5 years experience don't apply because they don't have that number. So in this case, it's very analogous, really. I think there are a lot of places you can go to get these things. eBay is great. Craigslist is great as well. Although they're all still, you have to be prepared to pay a lot of money. What really is more valuable to me as far as location goes is, I mentioned, and Aaron, you mentioned you don't like doing that stuff, but it's not that I get in my car and drive around looking for these places, but if I'm driving home and I see, an estate sale or I see something like that, and it might be a place where I think there might be games, I might drive by and ask. And that may happen 10% of the time. Just because if I find one thing here or there, that's really fun and interesting to me. I think that we have kind of moved beyond, in general, we've moved beyond the point where it is such a popular pastime now where you can find those holy grails almost at all. Now, if you go to Reddit and you look at our game collecting, you'll see that people do find these things here and there, but it's just so rare, and it's such a popular thing that, admittedly, I don't collect much. I don't buy anything. I can remember the last thing I bought.
And to your point, I mean, now sellers, even you think of grandma who has their grandchildren's games in their attic. So many cases or so many instances now. I mean, they are literally a search on their phone away from looking and getting a decent fair market value of an item, right? The chance that they're going to give you a box full of priceless memorabilia without having any clue of value, I'm not saying it's never happening nowadays, but it's becoming increasingly rarer for sure. One of the other outlets you touched on that I think is important, because it's part of the reason we do this show, is really using and leveraging that gaming community. And what do I mean by that? I mean, this show is part of that, us trying to put content out there and interact with like-minded gamers to say, hey, we're all going to have different passions, but a lot of us have grown up in the hobby. And frankly, there's a lot of people that I've talked to in our audience who have different rare games, right? And maybe during certain cycles of life, they say, well, I really still like this, but I kind of want to part with like my complete Dreamcast collection or something, right? They pare down certain parts of the collection as they make room for stuff or when they move or things like that. But I think keeping that network alive and really pursuing that, whether it's looking at online forums or communities, or in my case, one of the things that I did is I would buy some of these recent purchases. I would ask them, who do you know that's into this in your friend circle? Even if they're not interested in selling, I don't even care. Do they tell me if they have the item? And it's important enough to me where I will make them a crazy offer. Like seriously, it's kind of at that level where I've just said, don't even worry if it's for sale. Just tell me who has the stuff that you think takes care of it in the way that you do and has an interest. Or even if they don't sell, maybe they can connect me, right? You keep the network going and keep the levels of connection until you find somebody who is willing to sell and you could put a number in front of. And I think not only does that actually get you closer to the item that you want, but I think that's half the fun is just I've met so many cool people as part of this process that I have stores in Japan that I could connect with now. I have private sellers that I'm connected with. And if I wouldn't have gone through this process, I wouldn't have those connections, and I wouldn't have been able to interact with people who had a similar love of games to me.
Yeah, so I don't know. Okay, let's go over a little bit more of the places online, because we're talking a little bit more about these areas. We talked about eBay.
Yep.
There are places like OfferUp and things that are kind of things you might use on your phone they're kind of Craigslist-y, that are local areas. I think those are pretty good these days, although a lot of people are on them. So it was funny. A couple times I've used Amazon to buy used video games from Japan, strangely enough. In fact, the Metroid I talked about before, the sealed Metroid, I bought that. I think I bought that one. No, it was actually eBay. I'm sorry. Akumajou Densetsu, which is the Japanese version of Castlevania 3. I wanted that cartridge. It was like a $40 or $50 cartridge because it has that extra chip that we talked about in the past for music and such. So I decided I was going to spend $50 on this because I really wanted it and I wanted to speedrun it. I just wanted to experience the amazing sound in my Famicom. So I could not find a good one on eBay. They were all super expensive. So I found one from a Japanese seller, which did a very, very poor job of describing the item to me. Right. No pictures and of course anything on it. And I bought it, basically sight unseen for $50. And what I thought I was going to get was the cartridge. Instead, I got the complete box set. So I got a pretty nice box. I got the manual. I got everything, even the little inserts and things that they put in there. I didn't even expect it. And I went back later on and looked at it, and that entire package was worth quite a bit more than what I bought. So I think you can actually, or I paid for it rather. So you can actually use some of these things if you're very careful about what you're looking for. A couple things I will mention though that are important. You mentioned, Aaron, going to Japanese bookstores and things like that. Understand, again, it goes back to understanding what you're trying to buy and the rarity and where it was and so forth. Be careful about buying things that are in different regions. So whether they're NTSC, US, Japan versus PAL, European things. Strangely enough, here's an example. I really, really, really want Snatcher for the Sega CD. I used to have it. I got rid of it, and now I'm really mad because it's like $200 plus, maybe even $500 something to get the stupid game, and I really want it. So I bought the Japanese version for the Saturn. It was like $25. So there are examples where you can get a game that's Japanese, or you can get a PAL version or whatever that may or may not play in a console, depending on what it is. That could be cheaper. And so if you want to just experience a game and English is fine for you can get like a European kind of an English thing, and it could be PAL, could be 50 hertz or whatever, 50 frames a second, so 60 or whatever it might be. You can buy those and save yourself a little money. But also I've actually seen people think they're buying a U.S. copy of a game, and they spend U.S. prices, and they end up getting that PAL or that Canadian or whatever it might be that is not quite, for whatever reason, is not quite what they expected. So be very careful. And I think eBay has been around long enough to where good sellers know to explain all of the little nuances. Of course, you have to be very careful. I've seen in the past where someone bought a Metal Storm for Super Nintendo, or thinking they were buying a Metal Storm. They actually just bought the box, and or actually what they bought was a plastic box, with a cutout of like a South American version of the game or whatever it is, and they paid a good amount of money for it. And so those kinds of things are very, very, you have to be very wary of those kinds of things when you're buying online. I think the best bang for your buck, honestly, like you said, Aaron, are those communities. It is connecting to local people who love playing games, who happen to know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who wants to get rid of something, or who, like you said, has boxes of stuff they haven't touched in a year, and they'd be interested in, they'd be okay with you coming in, rummaging through a closet, and offering them some crazy money for some stuff that they haven't touched in years. That is where, the only times in at least in my area in Atlanta here, where I've seen crazy games for like the NES, like $1,000 plus games, like World Championship kind of cartridges, or those kinds of stadium events, things like that. Only times I've ever seen that is I go down to a couple of the used game stores. I get to be friends with the managers. He tells me, "Oh yeah, Johnny over here has 2 of these stadium events," and not that I'm going to buy a $10,000 game, whatever it is, but he probably has a whole bunch of other games that might be interesting. And now I know, and I could get in touch with him, and he can get in touch with other people. And eventually, like I said with the Rob the Robot thing, eventually you're going to find someone who's like, yeah, I don't want to go through the process of going through this with eBay. I know I could make $500, but I'll let it go for $300 or whatever it might be, because I like you and because I know it's going to a good person. And that's kind of, and that again, you pay it forward. You do these kinds of things for people that you work with as well, and it'll pay dividends in the end. Yeah,
and one of the last thing I'll touch on before we have one closing question is there are a lot of YouTube videos of collections. This has become an increasing category of YouTube videos, people showing off collections. And what I will tell you is, depending on, let's say you want the holy grail, as you put it, Chris, of items, where you say, I barely know how many exist. I've only ever seen a couple of these. If you go on YouTube channels and you see somebody doing a walkthrough of their collection, even if you say, oh, this is the most hardcore of the hardcore, they would never part with this. Like they value it so much. There's no way they'd ever sell. I'll tell you 2 things. One, everybody has a price. I don't care what somebody tells you. You could come into my house today and this Beatmania 2DX stuff, and you could put a number on me, and I'd say, I really love this stuff, but it is all yours for that price.
Yep.
Everybody has a price. So if you are dead set that I have to own this, that is a great forum, because people are willingly showing you every single thing and showing you all of the choice games from their collection. And the second thing is, even if that person is not willing to sell, there are so many times that I see where they build up this amazing collection and they have to move, or they have a job change. And there comes that tipping point where they say, do I want to box all of this crap up, transport it, pay to store it, whatever it is? There are all of these turning points that happen to where even if they love the collection, they have to part with it or they have to pare it down. And wouldn't it be nice if you were that person that reached out to them 6 months earlier and said, hey, really like what you're doing. If you ever are interested, I know you're probably not interested, but here's my email address, here's my phone number. If you ever think about selling it for whatever reason, call me. And they have that right there, and you're the first in line, and you reached out to them at a time that you didn't need to. I will tell you that if you're willing to play the long game and you're really looking for some rare stuff, or you just you don't quite know what you're collecting, but you just want to build that community of people, you reach out at a time where you don't have to. And like Chris said, you build that network of people to where when the opportunity comes, your name is top of mind. So Chris, let me close with one question. Is there any one item or collection of items, as you kind of think about it, what comes to your mind as something that you're debating? Do I want to go after this or not?
Okay, I already know. It's something that's about, maybe I think it's $1,000. I don't even know. It's an NES Zelda test cartridge.
Okay.
So if you looked at all the versions of Legend of Zelda, there's a yellow version. There are a couple of yellow versions that they... the story is they think they used them in those authorized repair centers to help test consoles when they were fixed. I think they had one for Mario or whatever. Anyway, they have one for Legend of Zelda. It is yellow, and it has a little bit of like test language on it or whatever. I always wanted one of those, and I'm a collector in a sense, but I'm not a hardcore collector. Like, I am so frugal with my money that I will not spend more than $200 on anything, and if it's $200, it has to be like a whole bunch of stuff and be a console, whatever it might be. So that's my holy grail. And there are so few of those things. I don't think I'll ever see one in person, and I don't think I'll ever own one.
Yeah. For me, the thing that I've been going back and forth on, so we all know, for anybody who's listened to this show, my love of all things Fire Emblem. And my copies of all the U.S. released games are immaculate, right? Perfect condition, like as good as the day you took the shrink wrap off. I'm debating whether I want similar boxed copies of 1 through 6, which are the Japan only games. Yes. It's kind of one of those where I don't want to play them, I wouldn't play them. And it's, once you get into box copies that the condition I want, it's probably a couple hundred a game. Sealed. Yeah, shrink wrap or bust, baby. But it's kind of one of those where knowing that I'm never going to play it, I really am having a hard time pulling the trigger. And so it's something that I'm really going back and forth on. But that's really, I'd say, the one group of items that I keep kind of going back and forth on to say, do I really want to make a move on this or not? But there is enough supply out there, even of the boxed copies, to where I don't feel any great sense of urgency. But
yeah, one thing I will add, by the way, I said that in jest about the sealed stuff, but if you are looking to buy sealed video games, Lord. Number one, don't. Just don't do it. And if you do decide to do it, make sure you absolutely do more research than... I mean, you have to do ludicrous amounts of research, and you might even have to find people who are experts in this to go do it, because there are so many copycats, so many fake things out there, so many repackages that you'll spend oodles of dollars on a game, and you'll never know that it was real. So please be able, that's why I stopped and I decided to go collect boxed copies. I don't care if it's sealed. Right. I want boxed copies so I can see everything in it. I can inspect everything in it, and it's just a safer thing from a collector's perspective. So just food for thought.
Great point. So with that, we'd love to hear from you, the audience. What's your experience with this? We'd love for you to tweet at us at BizCasual, BIS Casual Gamers. What's the rarest thing you've gone after? Is there anything on that wish list, that unicorn that you're chasing after still? So hit us up on Twitter. Let us know what you're thinking, what you're after, and what you're collecting. So with that, we're going to get into our game assignment. So Chris, this go around, you assigned me yet another Vita classic, if you will, also on PS4, but you assigned me Gravity Rush.
Yeah, which is really funny because, by the way, again, Aaron is such a Vita fan now after I beat it over his head for the last year and a half. This game was really interesting to me because I told you, Aaron, that I had played this a little bit. I actually owned the game, the first one for Vita. And I actually had problems with this is the first game I've had on the Vita that I had problems playing, not because of the game itself, but just because it gave me, and it could have been the OLED screen, it made me feel sick and like kind of dizzy when I was playing it. And so I never got to play this game through. So Aaron, I'd like you to tell me so that I can live vicariously through your experience.
So first of all, to let you know what kind of gamer I am or collector I am, this will tie into our last topic nicely. You can get this game for, I think, less than $5 for the download version. But of course, Chris, I couldn't just get the download version.
Couldn't just get the regular version.
I wanted the cartridge that only has box and no manual or insert or anything.
Course.
So it's as cheap as possible. Yet I didn't have to buy a new memory stick, so that there was added benefit.
Okay.
So it's not a cheap game, but I think that this is honestly one of probably the easiest impressions that I've ever given, because I think this is such a hit or miss game, and I'll tell you exactly what I would do in the audience if you're interested at all in this game. There is a free demo that's out there. I would download it, and I will promise you within 10 minutes of playing that, you will know whether you like this game or not. And I'll follow up on exactly what you touched on, Chris, which is this game is very unique in terms of how it deals with moving about the world and spatial relations. So as Chris mentioned, let's say I'm walking on solid ground, and I see something that I want to get to. I can jump, and I can manipulate gravity to basically drag me towards that item to where gravity is pulling me in reverse. So, down is up now, up is down, whatever the case may be. And you're manipulating gravity to move you around this three-dimensional world. Now, believe me, when you start experimenting with the game, the best analogy I can give to many players who've played it is Crackdown. Where at the beginning of the game, you get some basic powers, you can do some kind of crazy stuff, but as your powers grow, you can bound buildings and all kinds of wacky stuff. It's that same sense of discovery with Gravity Rush, that the worlds get bigger, the things you can do, you realize I can change gravity directions, let's say, at high speed, and so I can kind of move and in midair switch to start moving faster towards certain spots or enemies. Once you start realizing what you can do, it really opens up. But that said, it's disorienting at first. Believe me, while you're first getting used to the world, it takes a little bit of time to figure out how to work within this system at all. And I could absolutely see somebody getting motion sick, getting disoriented to the point where they say, I'm not having fun doing this because I'm confused. I think this is a game that plays out, honestly, much like Assassin's Creed games. And by that I mean, if you really take Assassin's Creed down to its core, I don't think most of the missions in Assassin's Creed are that great. I think, they're kind of like some Grand Theft Auto games where there's some great ones, there's some bad ones, there's some and a lot of average ones. And the mission structure in Gravity Rush is fine. Some are really fun, some are average, some are, probably subpar or a little bit boring. But the magic of the game is when you're in the overworld and you don't have any objectives whatsoever other than you have a world that is your sandbox, do you have fun experimenting with your powers and moving around the world? If the answer to that question is no after playing the demo, then you should not play this game anymore, and there is nothing about this game that is going to make you like it. I think the graphic style is really cool. It's much like, I'd say it had the same visual impact on me that Jet Set Radio did back in the day. And
right.
It looks different. The comic book kind of storytelling. Even in spite of all that, if you don't like the movement mechanic and how you get throughout the world, you will not like this game. Period. There is no redeeming quality that will salvage that. So you need to make the decision early on, do I like this or not? If not, it's just not for you, and that's fine.
Yeah, move on. Yeah.
And I will say, so at first, I kind of had the same, I'm not quite getting this. I feel like I'm a little clunky in terms of how I'm maneuvering. Once I got the hang of it, though, and once I started playing more, I really got into it. I really liked the pace of the game. I liked exploring. And honestly, I think I tweeted it a little bit ago, but I liked it so much that I ordered the sequel for PS4. Now, the one point that I do want to make, now, Chris, you played this on Vita as well, correct?
Yes, you're right.
So I bought the Vita version. They also did a remastered version for PS4. Gravity Rush 2 also, that is for PS4 exclusively. Even though I think the Vita does some cool things in terms of being able to tilt to kind of change the direction of gravity and being able to tap on the screen to target enemies, even though I think it's very novel and a lot of people have said and would continue to say that this is like a signature Vita game because of those elements, I honestly don't think that it necessarily has to be. So
it was distracting for me.
Yeah, I could see that, and I would say I was very willing to play the game on PS4 because I said I could very easily visualize just using the sticks to point the direction I wanted to go, because frankly, it doesn't work perfectly to be able to control it with motion controls or tapping controls alone on Vita. And so to me, I said, I think this is a good Vita game. I think it's going to be a good PS4 game. I think it's just kind of what you prefer as a format. And so basically the way I look at it now is I have the first game that's on the Vita. So if I want to play this type of game on the go, I have it. If I want to play the more full-featured version with a little bit better draw distance and some more traditional controls, I've got Gravity Rush 2, and I've got that available as well. So I honestly wouldn't get too hung up on which control scheme is better. I think they both are fine. I think it's really a preference of, is this a game you want to play on the go, or is this something that you would have played on a home console anyway? Yeah,
I think to their credit, if I recall correctly, you can still play with the control sticks even on the Vita. You don't have to do the motion stuff. And so that was, I like that. But I don't like, we talked a while back about, like blowing in the microphone for Fire Emblem stuff on the 2DS or 3DS. And then talked about how earlier on the Vita, I played the Uncharted Golden Abyss game, and they had some forced motion stuff as well. I don't like a lot of that stuff, and I think you're right. Some people really do enjoy it. For me, and when I played just a little bit I played of Gravity Rush, or I could play, that was very just not good for me. Just because, if I'm playing like laying in bed or sitting in a chair, and I don't want to be moving around all the time, having to try to do this stuff. And so to their credit, I like the fact that they provide both opportunities. Yeah. So you can play it how you want to play it. And for the people who really think that's a critical aspect of the game for them, and a critical interface method, that's great. And for those of us who are a little bit more old and grizzled, and we just want to have just our D-pad or our analog sticks and go from there, you can play it that way as well.
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned it in the past on one of our episodes. I am not an open world game fan. So that already, when I knew what this game was, I knew it was open world and mission based. That was kind of a strike against it for me. But I think that the movement mechanics are novel enough to keep me interested. But if you are an open world fan, I think you have a much higher degree of certainty of liking this game. Again, if you like the controls and they aren't too disorienting, I think that the mission structure, the way the missions unfold, I think that's well done. It's just not my typical cup of tea, so I can't really give it extra points for that. But I do think open world fans probably have more on offer here than probably for Chris and myself, because we're just not as into the genre as some others.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed it, though, because it was something that, a lot of people really like these games, and I was really frustrated because I just couldn't play it. And the funny thing is, you mentioned, the obvious piece is the gravity shifting piece of the mechanics would be what would make me dizzy, but it actually wasn't. It was just playing the game, moving, running around like normal and using moving the camera around. For whatever reason, just made me feel bad, and I didn't get a chance to actually play it. So I'm really interested, really happy to hear that you did enjoy it, and you ordered the sequel. I'd love to see how that comes out on the PS4 as well. But yeah, I'm happy that I finally found a game you liked.
Yeah, I've been on a roll lately. I've had a pretty good streak lately.
You're right.
And Vita has, again, Vita, my collection at this point, I think I've got, you deserve them all. I've got, I think, 8 Vita games total at this point in hard copy physical edition. And then I have some more downloadable, some PSP ones. But, all in all, I'm very happy with where my collection is at this point. I don't know that there's other games that I'm necessarily going to add to it other than some DLC games I want to pick up. But I feel very good. As a system, I feel that it's exactly what I wanted. And I think that, for trips and things like that, I've got plenty of catalog there to support me and plenty to entertain. And I honestly, I'm glad that we've taken this journey over the course of the show, sampling the finest that the PlayStation Vita has to offer, so to speak.
Well, the real answer there is just listen to Chris.
Yeah, this is probably true. So, Chris, this week you are going to be listening to me, and you are going to go back to the game that we almost got away from, but not quite.
Definitely shouldn't.
I still want to hear about it, and our audience has asked for it as well. I want to hear about Nier Automata. I will tell you, speaking of collector's editions, the collector's edition, go to the Square Enix website. I have actually signed up for a notification of the ridiculous collector's edition that I think is like $230 USD. It's beautiful and it's gorgeous, but I got to know that the game's good before I make a purchase like this. So, Chris, I'm desperate. That alert could come any day that this collector's edition is available.
You have to be able to. Can you wait 2 weeks?
I'm under the gun.
1 week. Yeah.
I'm under the gun, so I need to know, Chris. Do I need to cancel this? Do I need to send the alert off, or do I need to buy?
Yeah. So we will get into that next episode, which will be next week because we had to skip one last week. But yeah, you're right. I've actually been cheating a little bit, obviously, because we knew we'd come back to it. I have been playing it over the last week, and I think we have some really fun things to talk about with this game. So I can't wait to get into that. We'll make sure to hit that hot and heavy next episode.
Excellent. Well, this has been episode 41 of the Business Casual Gamers podcast. As a reminder, hit us up on businesscasualgamers.com, on Twitter at BISCasualGamers. Hit us up on YouTube. And if you liked what you heard, we would really appreciate a ratings on iTunes. It helps us spread the community and have even more people to collect from, let's be honest. So with that, we're going to bring episode 41 to a close. We will see you next week.
Thanks all.